What if the most enigmatic being in Middle-earth once ventured into the very heart of darkness and emerged completely unchanged? Today we're diving into one of the most spine-tingling possibilities hidden in the depths of Tolkien's world. A secret encounter between Tom Bombadil and Shelob in the tunnels beneath Mordor. This isn't your typical fantasy battle. This is something far more unsettling, pulled from the shadowy corners of Middle-earth lore, where ancient powers collide in ways that would reshape everything we thought we knew about good, evil, and the spaces between them. Picture this. Long before Frodo's desperate flight through those suffocating passages, before Sam's heroic stand against the ancient spider, there was another meeting in those tunnels, one that nobody was meant to witness, one that challenges every assumption about power, corruption, and the true nature of Tom Bombadil himself. We know Tom as the cheerful forest dweller who treats the One Ring like a party trick. But what happens when that same carefree spirit encounters something that predates even Sauron's malice? What happens when unstoppable joy meets unmovable hunger? The story begins with a question that haunts every Tolkien scholar. What exactly is Tom Bombadil? Gandalf calls him the oldest being in Middle-earth, older than the world's current memory. He existed before the Elves awakened, before Sauron served Morgoth, before the very concept of the Rings of Power. That places him in the deepest foundations of Arda itself. But here's where things get interesting. If Tom truly is that ancient, then he would have witnessed the corruption of Ungoliant, the primordial spider of darkness from whom Shelob descended. He would have seen the first shadows creep across the world, would have watched as hunger itself took physical form and began devouring light. In the Silmarillion, we learn that Ungoliant was so terrible that even Morgoth feared her. She consumed the light of the two trees, plunging Valinor into darkness, and her offspring scattered across Middle-earth like living nightmares. Shelob, dwelling in her tunnel fortress, represents the last great remnant of that primordial darkness. So what would drive Tom Bombadil, who never leaves his beloved old forest, to venture into the most corrupted corner of Middle-earth? The answer might lie in something we often overlook. Tom isn't just carefree. He's a guardian. When the hobbits face danger in his realm, he appears exactly when and where he's needed. He commands Old Man Willow with authority that brooks no argument. He banishes the Barrow-wights with songs that carry the weight of ages. Tom doesn't protect through violence. He protects through presence, through being so fundamentally himself that darkness simply cannot take root around him. But what if that protection once required a journey into the very heart of shadow? Consider this possibility. Sometime in the long ages before the War of the Ring, something began stirring in Shelob's tunnels. Not just her usual predatory hunger, but something deeper. Something that threatened to spill out beyond Mordor's borders and corrupt the very foundations of the world. The kind of primordial darkness that even the Valar would hesitate to face directly. Tom Bombadil, being what he is, would have sensed this disturbance, not as a threat to himself, but as a wound in the world's song, a discordant note that needed to be addressed. So he would have done what he always does, walked straight toward the problem, humming an old tune, completely unafraid. The journey itself would have been remarkable. Picture Tom strolling through the misty mountains, past the ruins of ancient kingdoms, across the desolation of Gorgoroth, while Sauron's forces scatter before him like smoke. Not because he's fighting them, but because they simply cannot comprehend what they're looking at. Orcs bred for war and cruelty would find their weapons turning to ash in their hands, not through any magic, but because violence itself becomes meaningless in Tom's presence. The eye of Sauron, that great instrument of surveillance and malice, would slide right past him. Tom exists outside the frameworks of power that Sauron understands. He cannot be dominated because he has no desire to dominate. He cannot be corrupted because corruption requires something to corrupt. And Tom is so purely himself that there are no cracks for darkness to exploit. But Shelob is different. She's not one of Sauron's servants. She's older, hungrier, more fundamental. She represents appetite itself, the desire to consume and devour that exists at the root of all corruption. When Tom finally reaches her tunnels, he's not facing a corrupted being, but corruption in its most primal form. The meeting would happen in the deepest part of her lair, where the webs stretch back through geological ages and the very stones weep with accumulated malice. Shelob would sense his approach long before he arrives, her alien mind struggling to process what's coming toward her. Here is something that should be prey, should be meat, should be consumed and forgotten, but every instinct tells her that this approaching presence is wrong, impossible, dangerous in ways she cannot understand. When Tom finally enters her central chamber, the confrontation begins not with violence, but with recognition. Shelob sees in him everything she has spent millennia devouring: joy, freedom, the pure song of creation. And Tom sees in her something equally fundamental, the hunger that exists at the heart of all shadow, the desperate need that drives every act of evil. But here's where the encounter becomes truly extraordinary. Tom doesn't recoil from Shelob's presence. He doesn't fight her or flee from her. Instead, he does something that perhaps no other being in Middle-earth could do. He acknowledges her. Not with pity or disgust, but with the same gentle recognition he shows to every other creature in his forest. This moment would shake Shelob to her core. For ages beyond counting, she has been nothing but hunger, nothing but the urge to feed and grow and consume. But Tom's gaze carries something else, the memory of what she was before the corruption, before the hunger, before the shadow. He sees not just the monster, but the spark of creation that still flickers somewhere in her alien consciousness. The conversation, if it can be called that, would happen in languages older than speech. Tom might hum a melody that carries the memory of the music of creation, the divine song that brought the world into being. Shelob might respond with sounds that echo the first darkness, the hungry void that existed before light, not words, but communications that touch the very foundations of existence. What would they discuss? Perhaps the nature of hunger itself. Shelob's appetite is infinite, all-consuming, but Tom's contentment is equally absolute. She takes everything and is never satisfied. He needs nothing and lacks for nothing. In a strange way, they are perfect opposites, the ultimate consumer and the ultimate provider, the endless hunger and the inexhaustible gift. Tom might offer her something no one else ever has, a choice. Not salvation in any traditional sense, but recognition that her hunger comes from a deeper emptiness, a wound inflicted in the world's youth that has festered for ages. He cannot heal that wound, but he can acknowledge it, can sing to the pain that drives her endless feeding. For Shelob, this moment would be devastating. She has built her entire existence around consumption, around the simple certainty that she is predator and everything else is prey. But Tom's presence suggests a different possibility, that hunger itself might not be the deepest truth, that even appetite can be transformed by understanding. The outcome of their meeting would not be a traditional victory or defeat. Tom cannot destroy Shelob because he does not deal in destruction. Shelob cannot consume Tom because he exists outside the frameworks of consumption. Instead, something subtler occurs, a mutual recognition that leaves both beings changed in ways neither fully understands. Tom might leave behind a gift, not an object, but a song that echoes in Shelob's tunnels long after he's gone, a melody that carries the memory of fullness, of satisfaction, of the peace that comes when hunger finally ends. Not enough to transform her completely, but enough to plant a seed of doubt about the absoluteness of appetite. For her part, Shelob might offer Tom something equally valuable, a deeper understanding of shadow's true nature. Not evil for its own sake, but a profound loneliness that expresses itself through consumption. The knowledge that even the darkest beings carry within them an echo of the original light, however twisted and buried it might be. When Tom finally leaves her domain, walking back through Mordor as casually as he entered it, both beings would carry something new. Shelob returns to her webs and her feeding, but now there's a different quality to her hunger. She still devours what comes to her, but there's a hesitation, a moment of something almost like regret before each killing. This change, subtle as it is, might explain certain mysteries in the later narrative. Why does Shelob retreat when faced with the light of Galadriel's gift? Perhaps because Tom's song has left her with a memory of what light truly represents. Why does she seem almost reluctant when she attacks Frodo and Sam? Perhaps because she recognizes in their simple courage an echo of the fearless joy that once walked through her tunnels. The ripple effects of this encounter would extend far beyond Shelob's lair. Tom's journey through Mordor would leave traces, places where his songs temporarily lifted the shadow, where plants grew in poisoned soil, where the very stones remembered what peace felt like. These changes would be too subtle for Sauron to detect directly, but they would weaken the foundations of his realm in ways that might prove crucial in the final war. More importantly, Tom's understanding of shadow would deepen. He returns to his forest not just as a guardian of light, but as someone who has looked into the heart of darkness and found there not pure evil, but wounded creation. This knowledge colours every subsequent encounter with shadow in his realm. When he faces the Barrow-wights, when he commands Old Man Willow, when he dismisses the power of the ring, he does so with the authority of someone who has seen corruption at its source and refused to be either consumed or corrupted by it. The psychological impact of their meeting would be equally profound for both beings. Shelob, accustomed to inspiring terror in every creature she encounters, would be forced to grapple with the existence of something that views her neither as enemy nor victim, but as simply another part of the world's complex song. This recognition would introduce a new element into her alien consciousness: doubt. Not about her power or her hunger, but about the ultimate meaning of both. For Tom, the encounter would represent a completion of his role as guardian. He has always protected his forest from shadow, but now he understands shadow itself more deeply. He sees it not as something to be destroyed, but as something to be contained, understood, and ultimately transformed through patience and compassion. The theological implications of their meeting would resonate through the deeper structures of Tolkien's mythology. If Tom truly is what the text suggests, a being connected to Arda's fundamental nature, then his encounter with Shelob represents a kind of dialogue between creation and corruption, between the world's original song and the discord that has been introduced into it. This meeting would also shed new light on the nature of evil in Middle-earth. Tolkien consistently portrays evil as corruption of good, never as something independently created. Shelob's hunger, viewed through Tom's eyes, becomes not an aberration, but a twisted expression of the same creative force that drives all growth and change. Her appetite is infinite because it echoes the infinite creativity of the Ainur, but turned inward, consuming rather than creating. The practical consequences of their encounter would unfold slowly over the centuries. Shelob's slightly diminished hunger might allow certain prey to escape her webs, creating tiny changes in the patterns of Middle-earth's history. Travelers who should have died in her tunnels instead survive to carry news, bear children, or accomplish small deeds that accumulate into larger changes. Meanwhile, Tom's deepened understanding of shadow enhances his guardianship of the old forest. When dark creatures probe his borders, they encounter not just resistance but comprehension. He knows now how shadow works, how it spreads, how it can be contained not through force but through the patient maintenance of alternatives. The meeting would also explain certain puzzling aspects of both characters. Why is Tom so remarkably unaffected by the ring's power? Perhaps because his encounter with Shelob taught him to recognize corruption in all its forms, making him immune to even the most subtle temptations. Why does Shelob seem less active in the centuries before the War of the Ring? Perhaps because Tom's song left her with just enough doubt to slow her endless hunger. The symbolic weight of their encounter extends beyond the immediate narrative. In a world where most conflicts between good and evil end in the destruction of one or the other, Tom and Shelob's meeting represents a different possibility, that understanding can exist without agreement, that recognition can occur without resolution, that even the deepest enemies can acknowledge each other's fundamental nature without surrendering their own. This type of encounter fits perfectly with Tolkien's deeper themes about the nature of power and corruption. Throughout his work, the most profound changes come not through violence but through understanding, not through conquest but through recognition of shared origin. Tom's meeting with Shelob embodies this principle in its most extreme form, the absolute corruption acknowledging the absolute innocence, and both being changed by the recognition. The literary significance of such an encounter would be enormous. It would represent one of the few moments in Tolkien's mythology where shadow and light meet as equals, where neither dominates the other, where the conversation itself becomes more important than its outcome. This type of scene would rank among the most powerful in all of Middle-earth lore, not for its action, but for its psychological and spiritual depth. As we consider the implications of this hypothetical meeting, we're forced to grapple with fundamental questions about the nature of good and evil, about the possibility of redemption, and about the meaning of understanding. Can someone be completely corrupted and still retain some spark of their original nature? Can someone be completely innocent and still comprehend the depths of corruption? Tom and Shelob's encounter suggests that the answer to both questions might be yes. The meeting would also illuminate the unique role that beings like Tom Bombadil play in Tolkien's world. They exist not to fight evil but to maintain alternatives to it, not to destroy corruption but to preserve the memory of what existed before corruption. In facing Shelob, Tom wouldn't be trying to convert or destroy her. He would simply be reminding the world that other possibilities exist, that hunger is not the only truth, that even the deepest darkness cannot completely extinguish the original light. What makes this encounter so compelling is its refusal to provide easy answers. Tom doesn't save Shelob, but he doesn't abandon her either. She doesn't reform, but she's no longer quite the same. Both beings continue in their natures, but with a deeper awareness of what lies beyond those natures. It's the kind of complex, nuanced resolution that makes Tolkien's work so enduringly powerful. The philosophical implications extend into questions about the nature of evil itself. If Tom can meet Shelob and emerge unchanged, what does that tell us about the ultimate power of corruption? If Shelob can encounter pure goodness and retain her hunger while gaining something else, what does that suggest about the permanence of evil? Their meeting would force us to reconsider our assumptions about moral absolutes and the possibility of transformation. In the end, the secret meeting between Tom Bombadil and Shelob represents something unique in Middle-earth lore. A moment where the ultimate questions are asked but not answered, where the deepest mysteries are approached but not solved. It embodies the kind of encounter that changes both participants without destroying either, that reveals truth without demanding conversion, that acknowledges the full complexity of existence without trying to simplify it. Whether this meeting actually happened in the depths of Tolkien's imagination or exists only in the spaces between his written words, it represents something essential about his vision of Middle-earth. That even in the darkest places, understanding remains possible, that even between the most fundamental enemies, recognition can occur, and that the greatest victories sometimes come not through conquest but through the simple act of refusing to let shadow have the final word. The ripples of such an encounter would continue spreading through the ages, influencing events in ways too subtle to track but too significant to ignore, reminding us that in Tolkien's world, as in our own, the most important meetings often happen in the deepest darkness, between beings who should be enemies but discover instead that they are simply different notes in the same cosmic song.